know if you've seen this guy who's on Twitter, the Room Raider account,
No.
who if like this is for cable news guests who did their hits from their living room or from their apartment or from wherever, and he would critique people and their backgrounds. And I mean, it gained popularity because a lot of people were just very happy that this random guy was just praising their office setup or the books they had in the background or so on and so forth. And a couple of people, he would be snarky with a couple of people saying, well, you need more plants or you need better lighting. And the response was 2 letters, and the response was 2 words, and the first one began with F.
Right.
So some people did not appreciate the feedback from just some guy who appointed himself as the Twitter background home interview reviewer.
That's funny.
But I actually really like that. I mean, not like, I didn't like the circumstances leading up to it, of course, but
right.
In terms of finding like interesting human moments that you could discover during a very kind of scary and anxiety-ridden time, as we've talked about before, it was kind of like just kind of a fun peek into people's lives. And I did like that little bit of reality that everybody was kind of forced to participate in when they might have kind of hidden that side from themselves before.
Right. Yeah, I remember one time we were at work. This is early in the pandemic, and you came in and you said, or is that WBBM? And you came in and you said, does anybody feel strange that there's like nobody outside? I'm like, no, that's fine. And then 2 hours later, I was having a panic. This is like really early in the pandemic. It must have been like March or April. I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, because everything was so quiet.
It was weird.
Yeah,
very
weird.
It was a very weird time. Because everything changed on a dime. Right. That was the remarkable aspect of it. Was a Friday afternoon at the beginning of March, and it was like the last normal Friday afternoon rush where you had full trains going into and out of the loop. You had old time traffic. You had like big crowds going into and through the Prudential Plaza lobby. Because you remember like 8:00 on a Friday morning or a Tuesday morning or like during a weekday morning before the pandemic, not only was it full of people who were going into the building who worked there, but it was also people who were walking through on the pedway system somewhere else in that particular portion of the loop. Right. And then the Friday, I mean, I always want to say like the 2 turning points are in the pandemic history was Tom Hanks got it, and then the NBA shut down. Right. And that was a Thursday. No, that was a Wednesday, and then things started shutting down. Then on Friday the 13th, like the building was a ghost town.
Right.
And then by the 20th, like a Friday afternoon, nobody was downtown. It was empty. It was That's life strange. After people empty. Yeah. And I didn't want to start, openly, being very anxious, because that's not how I operate. And I don't think that's really good for other people around me, right, to be like super nervous or super agitated. Right. But that was such a strange moment and so disconcerting that I had to say like, wow, this is extremely odd. Like this is, it felt like I Am Legend. You were the Omega Man going downtown on a Saturday morning. I mean, the best part about that was, at least at the time, because working Saturdays and Sundays, you would get in the car and then I would finish at 1:00 on Saturday and noon on Sunday. And in the before time and also in the after time, it's an hour to get back to the northwest suburbs. And then when everything shut down, it was 25 minutes. And that part I really enjoyed. Right. That's the one part I miss.
Oh, by the way, to interrupt, because somebody just made a comment, Jeremy Ross, he made a comment on Facebook. He said, "Good dude!" !
Tell Jeremy to keep the golden retriever pictures coming.
Right, that's true, on his Twitter, yeah.
And then every time now I see a golden retriever, and like I'm really, they get real close to your face, I have to do the boop that he does.
Yeah. Although tonight I was walking around the Gold Coast, and tonight I saw a dog, and the dog was looking at me. There are a lot of dogs around here, and the dog started coming towards me. So then I asked the owner, I said, "Oh, can I pet the dog?" And she said, "Oh, well, the dog's really shy. So, well, hold on, let me introduce you." And I thought, this is strange. And so I started to move towards the dog, and the dog meanly barked at me. And I thought, ooh, that's a big fail. So usually
at least the owner kind of understood their dog's moods.
Yeah. But I felt like,
oh, they're friendly, and then they tackle you. It's
right.
They kind of knew that their dog was persnickety.
Yeah.
And it was trying to ease them into easing them into meeting you, but then the dog was having nothing of it. So
yeah. But I was gonna say that, you were talking about the pandemic, and the thing that freaked me out is I don't know if you were at the station that day, but it was on Saturday, and the governor made that announcement, we are closing down, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am absolutely freaked out what's happening. And then you just felt like all the people got sucked up and they just disappeared somewhere, and we didn't see them for several months.
Well, because it was they had the Saturday. So the Friday was the 13th. Saturday was the 14th. And they already canceled both St. Patrick's Day parades by that point. They had canceled the downtown one on Saturday, the Columbus Drive parade, and Southside Irish was also canceled. Right. And I was working as an anchor that morning, and the traffic reporters were saying, well, Metro's having extensive delays because the trains are still crowded and people are still coming downtown to go to the bars. Like the parade being canceled was not going to stop the party.
Right.
And I thought, well, this is, there's like some sort of shutdown coming. And then I think it was probably the next day when Governor Pritzker in the daily briefing said, oh yeah, by the way, we're closing businesses because you can't have everybody cramming into a bar when you have this, at the time, a respiratory virus that nobody knew how it transmitted, and nobody knew how many people would get it and how serious it would get. And then then it switched over to restaurants can still do carryout service. You can still do like order online and go get stuff from a store. Because did you get I'm sure you got the letter, well, then from Entercom, saying that, now that the stay-at-home order is in effect, this is a national emergency, and pursuant to like the Federal Communications Act of 1934, this is an essential worker traveling downtown on official business.
Right.
And it was basically just keep this in your car in case anybody hassles you.
Right.
And thankfully, I never had to use that. And then we got another round of letters for the riots that happened in May.
Well, you also got those passes that said media. I still have it.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, and I remember we had to show it. And there are some people who really did have to get downtown and they had to show it. And even those letters, the initial letters that we got, like pursuant to blah, 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 we get to walk through. I did carry it in my pocket because I was walking to work at the time and I was afraid somebody was going to stop me.
Poor Rachel Pearson, who I think she got really caught up in the fact it was one of the Saturday afternoons when the National Guard completely shut down access to downtown.
Right.
And every way in, she was having no luck. And she was on the phone with Ron Gleason and Julie Mann, and they were all trying to kind of guide her in, and management was on the phone with the National Guard,
right,
like trying to get some way in. And I don't think she didn't start until 3:30 or 4.
Right.
And I just stayed on the air until she got in, and she was like, I really have to go to the bathroom. Like, yes, you go do what you got to do. But I still have those letters as kind of now they're kind of interesting artifacts from an interesting time. But that was also very disconcerting when
it was very strange.
I mean, it was very nice of them to say that you're an essential worker. I mean, that was a a certain level of, you like you like that level of appreciation, but the circumstances that led to that were less than ideal.
Well, it was dystopian because we couldn't just be like a lot of other people and just stay home and, drink our coffee or whatever. And of course, there were other people who really were frontline workers who had to work with the public, who had to go to work. But it was just very strange. But I feel like, I think that Illinois, I think people did the right thing. I mean, it was a public health issue, but I don't even know about how kids are going to be affected by it, years later.
I mean, we're still trying to grapple with what, and it wasn't like a true I mean, people talk about how it was a lockdown, but yeah, there were businesses weren't allowed to open, or they weren't allowed to have customers inside. And if you were the owner of that business or employed in an industry that relied on that business, the impact was profound. And, I think what everyone forgets is that we really didn't know what it was
right
back in March and April of 2020. And everything that's happening now, like in terms of, everything's essentially reopened and everything is kind of back to the way it was, is a function of the fact that we, out of necessity, learned an awful lot really quickly. And I mean, the vaccine is one of the greatest technological innovations of the last 50 years. I mean, it's up there with the moon landing.
Although some people would say, they argue, well, vaccine, obviously, what difference does it make because you can still get COVID? It's not like the flu vaccine, which makes it hard to get the flu.
Well, I mean, I'm of the vaxxed and boosted crowd. I had it. I got COVID back in March, and I don't know what it would have been like had I not been vaxxed, but it went from something that could be potentially very serious to something that was just merely annoying.
Yeah.
And I mean, but thinking back to the vaccine development, when I remember doing the business hour at the beginning, and we would have a vaccine scientist on, or a Bloomberg reporter who was, well versed in public health, and the question was, if all goes well, when do we get the vaccine? And the answer was always 4 years, and that's the record.
Oh gosh.
And then it turned over into, well, lucky for us, there was a lot of SARS vaccine research that was kind of on a shelf somewhere,
right,
from the SARS outbreak back in 2003 that kind of burned itself out. And then by the time it burned itself out, there was no need to continue vaccine research. So half of the work had already been done.
Yeah.
And then you add the fact that we had mapped the human genome starting in 2000, and this remarkable field of mRNA technology. That 4-year record was shattered. I mean, it's remarkable that like all the assumptions that were made were based on it was going to be 2020 except for 4 years,
right?
And instead, by the summer of 21, I think people are kind of going back to the lives that they had, and making up for lost living.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still being careful. But I didn't really have much going on before the pandemic. I didn't really have much of a social life, but I did more things. I didn't think twice about doing things, but now I do think twice. So, but weirdly, I don't know if this is your case, but I feel like I've met more people, and I've gotten to know people I already know better. Have you experienced that?
It's a function of, you hate saying it because it was said so many times, but I think it was a function of unprecedented times that, things were so weird, and we all had this common frame of reference that it's something you can talk about almost immediately. I mean, if you go up to anybody, it's like, March of 2020, what are you doing? Like, everyone's got a story. I have one, you have one. And so it's just a good way to get to know people. And then maybe, just all that time that we all had to ourselves, or in strange circumstances at work, it made you more, reflective. It made you more likely to do things that you may not have been capable of doing before, or you were uncomfortable. I mean, because I'm not it's always like the big irony. It's like, yes, I'm someone who works in journalism and someone who works in broadcasting, and I talk to people for a living, but off the clock, I'm not that person at all.
Yeah, but you also have a family. We also have a family, a big family, and your extended family is living around here, so you're busy.
Well, that is true. I mean, there's a life outside of radio, but it's all my wife always jokes that, like, you're extremely quiet in a group of people, and I'm the one who's always talking to people, and then you're the public speaker, and then I'm the one who's always like very, nervous about getting up in front of people. So I think
really? Oh, you don't like speaking?
She does not, and I'll sit there and say, "Oh, just do this. You'll be great," and
okay.
She always is. But we always talk about how we complement each other very well, with two kind of different personalities that mesh.
Wait, so you're saying that you're not naturally an outgoing person?
I mean, if you're comfortable with like the people like in the newsroom, because I know everybody,
yeah,
and I've known them for 6 years, like I'm very outgoing in that situation, but in some others, I just kind of keep to myself. I'm not like good time, Mr. Good Time, handing out the business cards, say, "Hey, I'm the guy on the radio." That I don't do that at all. It's very difficult for me.
Okay. Oh, well, see, I have a hard time because I'm not on the air like you are. Because, the thing is, that's why this live streaming is so exciting, because I love being live. I love live radio, love live TV, love it, live everything. But I think that when you do talk a lot for a living, you probably do want to be more quiet. However, I would probably need like 2 hours down, and then I would need to do something again. Because because actually sometimes I teach in the morning, and then I go to work at WBBM, and I am so wired and excited. I just have to talk. But I'm like, no, my job is not to talk. So it's a struggle to be quiet.
It's very, the weirdest thing for me was when I started out in Milwaukee, my first shift was evenings, and it was evenings on Saturday and Sunday. And then it switched over to evenings during the week. And I would always get home at midnight. And at midnight, everyone's going to bed, or they're already in bed, or they're asleep. And, I have been up drinking coffee on the radio, doing, just up and awake, and you're still like kind of in that performance mode when you get home. And yeah, it takes a couple of hours to come down from that. And of course, the rest of the world's already asleep. So you have to read a book or watch a movie or play a video game or something. Like, just try to, get your mind to wind down.
Yeah. Yeah, because I remember one time when I did a live stream with Sam P, who used to work at WGN.
Oh yeah,
Yanovich.
It's kind of it's very funny you mentioned him. So when I came back to WGN after I left the Loop in 2015, there were producers there and interns who had obviously came in after I left the first time. And Sam was a Columbia College student. He's like, "I remember when you talked to my remember those Saturday after, it was in the fall, it was like a high school or college radio conference. They bring all the professionals in. And I think I spoke at 2 of them. And Sam was like, "I remember when you spoke to my college radio seminar," or whatever it was. It was just kind of funny that there these kids who were, and I say kids loosely, but students who I talked to over a decade ago, they're now professionals. They're now making their way into the business. They are in the position that I used to be in.
Yeah.
And just as how I would see like somebody a couple of years older than me as, someone who was experienced, had all the answers, it was very sad to see that other people felt the same about me.
Yeah.
But it was also a cool feeling. It was good. It's always good to see people come into the business, and they're very enthusiastic, and they're very excited to be there. And it's just a great energy to be around, and it makes you feel good.
Yeah, so I did a live stream with him recently, and I was so excited because he's such a cool guy that the next day I was still hyper about it. I'm such a dork,
Did
but
you get any sleep? Like, where you just said they just
no,
carried that interview high all the way?
no, I managed to get some sleep, but the next day I was so excited because I thought, oh my gosh, I had such a great time. I love live streaming and trying to get all these people. And yeah, I think it was because he was just so cool. Plus, he's a TV pro now, so he knows how to do it. So
He is Vision, is that correct? The Las Vegas sports gambling outfit that Brent Mus Brent Musburger used to work for. That's, I want to
well,
say
now
that.
he's New England now. He's
Okay.
yeah, he does TV in New England, Fox, and he does appearances on Fox for sports. But yeah, he's into betting. That's his thing. So it's cool.
Well, good for him. Again, it just goes to show you 2015 was 7 years ago. Those Columbia College, high school, college radio seminars that was 2010 and 2011.
Mhm.
And it is not much of a surprise that not only do you have people that you talked to when they were students have done very well for themselves, but I also say have, surpassed you too. Like they're really well on their way, and that's a great feeling.
But honestly, for some people though, it is very hard to get something. You have to have a certain kind of tenacity to really do it, and you have to be willing sometimes to go to a smaller market or whatever you have to do. Sometimes you really have to go a certain path that's not easy, and people don't want to go through it because they can make a better living doing something else and they can do it better, more quickly. So not everybody goes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there are just so many more paths now
Right.
than there used to be, which is a good thing. And in some ways, it's also kind of intimidating because, I think you and I remember what the route map was, and it was a pretty kind of defined process of how you got there. And then now there are multiple ways to get to a destination, and you may not know all of them, and you may not know where the side turns to nowhere are as well. But I think for the longest time, when I was in college in the 90s, it was, you're going to go to Marquette, and then you're going to graduate, and then you're going to go to some very small town, and then you'll stay there for maybe a year or a year and a half, and then go to a slightly bigger town, and then maybe you get to a Milwaukee or a Cleveland, like a city, and then from there it's Chicago, New York, Dallas network.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, the thing is, I didn't study broadcasting in school, and I got into it later. And so by the time I got into it, the business was already messed up. But I thought, okay, I really love radio, and I want to see what happens. So, but it was a very hard road to where I am now.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we've talked about this before. You would say it's worth it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think everybody who's in the business, whether it's TV or radio or print, dealt with their fair share of stupid crap along the way. And everybody has stories about people or situations or jobs that didn't quite pan out. But it's just another story on your journey. And hopefully you learn a thing or three along the way, and you're smarter on your way to your next stop.
Exactly. Yeah, I won't put up with certain stuff anymore. I really will not tolerate it. But yeah, but it is a journey, and you learn so much and you become wiser. And then it really makes you think, do I really want to do this? And the answer is yes. Because I remember one time Julie Mann was saying to me, oh, you do a great job. Because I was like actually overqualified for what I was doing. And I said, well, I'm just going to keep doing this until I can't do it anymore. Like I have the day job, and, I'm doing radio, and as long as I'm just in it, I really don't care, but now I'm really in it. So it's much better. But yeah.
I mean, for me, the way things work at the radio station is you come in as a freelancer, and then over time, a full-time opening presents itself and you move up. And when I was in the freelance pool, there was a great deal of anxiety about, is the opening going to present itself? Am I going to move up? And then it happened. And other people have that same anxiety, and I go, no, it's going to be okay. you're
Well, but
good,
sometimes,
it's going to be recognized.
well, sometimes it
Maybe not
happens that
here,
way.
but it'll be recognized by somebody
Yeah,
somewhere.
you're right. You're right. And also in some kind of media, because sometimes it doesn't happen in radio, or sometimes it happens on TV. It could happen in Hollywood. It really could happen in so many ways. It could happen in podcasting, because now people are being paid to podcast. It's not just a hobby anymore.
I mean, it could happen. Let's say you have an aptitude for talking about business, and you know how to talk to business leaders, you know how to talk to financial advisors, bankers. And then there's a small financial services firm that, as part of its marketing efforts, wants to ramp up a digital operation. They find it intimidating. They don't know what best practices are. They want a seasoned professional to do it.
Mhm.
And if you have those skills as a communicator that you forged in radio or in television or in digital media, that's paying gig. And
I
it may
agree.
be a paying gig that's above and beyond what commercial broadcasting may have to offer. So I think the lesson is that, the skills that you develop here, you can market them in many places and not just in a broadcast media context, because they're valuable in lots of locations.
Yeah, that's why I always tell the students, because I always say that in some ways it's the best time to graduate from college, because there's so many variables. And if you have certain skills, you can work for a company in-house. You don't have to necessarily work in broadcasting. But I just really like working in radio, because I like, and also especially live commercial radio, because it's always like scary, because you don't know, are things going to be okay? Are things going to go well? Are we going to have a tech issue? Oh my gosh, did we get that word right? I don't know. I love the deadlines, and I like the quirky people and everything.
That is always that to me is the best part about live radio, whether it's live and local or live and national. It's just you're reacting to events as they happen. I remember reading shortly after Johnny Carson died in 2005, somebody was describing what was the Tonight Show when he was the host, and this was kind of before late night television became the it's just comedy sketches, and then
Exactly. Like
and
soundbite kind of thing.
yeah, it's just comedy sketches and then interviews and musical guests are kind of like the connective tissue, but it's basically sketch to sketch to sketch, bit to bit to bit. But in Johnny's day, it was monologue, desk bit, and then you have 4 or 5 interviews because the show was 90 minutes long. And because nothing else was on TV that night, or at that particular time, except for old movies, it was incumbent upon Johnny Carson or whoever was hosting the Tonight Show in his place to make every guest interesting and be an interesting conversationalist. And they said it was kind of like being a downhill skier. And the bell rings, and you get shot down the ramp, and there's the slalom course, and you go through the monologue, and then you go through the desk bit, and then there's the big star, and then there's the author, and then there's the comedian, and then there's maybe the human interest person, and you have to get through every obstacle, and then the next thing you know, you get to the bottom, 90 minutes have passed and the show's over. And I feel like that's kind of the course of live radio, that at least in my case, 10:03, the bell rings, you're down the ramp, and who knows what's going to happen. I mean, obviously our format is still very regimented and very segmented, so you know where to go. There's always like good signposts, but you could find yourself in a situation where we have 10 minutes warning, there's an address from the White House, you got to move commercials around,
Right.
and in the process of doing that, you have to know what the president's talking about. So you have to kind of ad lib into it and ad lib out of it. And if as a live news event is unfolding, you're constantly looking at the commercial log, figuring out where you can move everything. How are you going to get back into regular programming? The Noon Business Hour is the same way. I mean, all of our guests are known quantities, and they're all very good. But let's just say you have a guest who, in a 3.5 minute segment, is they may be not particularly loquacious in the first 2 or 3 answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then question number 4, boom, they open up and they can't stop talking.
Mm-hmm.
And you're very glad that they have a lot to say, but you're looking at the clock and it's like, all right, we're a minute behind.
Okay.
We're a minute and 15.
Right.
We got to find a way to make this work. And that's both the source of stress. It is the source of exhilaration. It's also a source of great satisfaction that you can solve the problem. And that's what I love about, kind of doing live radio. I mean, I was in a voice track situation on the Loop, and I can see where and why voice tracking is good. Because, if you're running like 3 songs in a row and you're doing a 2-minute comedy bit with with the host and the news person, and it doesn't work, you can do it again and put your best work out there. But I also felt that working with a net and the ability to make it better also took the sense of immediacy out of it, because it was always weird, like, the time when the thing that you've pre-produced is actually running, you can go to the bathroom or get a cup of coffee or something like that. So I do prefer live, even though, it's the exception and not the rule anymore.
Right. I know. And I wish that, even for me, I don't do live, obviously, but I like when there's a problem. They're like, oh my gosh, such and such is happening. Okay. The time I did do live at WBBM was when I was running the board for Dave Marcette for several months during the pandemic. And I did feel that, like, oh my gosh, the governor is speaking. I've got to move all these spots. Oh, wait a second. He wants to jump in and give a time check. I was really on edge, but I wasn't on the air, but it was still so fun. But I guess the problem is that people don't know. It's unfortunate that people don't understand how extremely fun it is. And it's sort of it's not really a growing medium in that way. And I wish that if people knew how exciting it was, even to listen to it, that it'd be nice if it was growing.
Well, at the same, I mean, it's people tell stories about a lot of the business practices of broadcasting.
Wow.
And in many ways, the preponderance of them are not very flattering. Right. I think it was Dave McBride, who used to work with Robert Murphy and used to work with Steve Dahl, who said something about how this is the only industry where common hiring practices are illegal everywhere else. Like, you can let somebody go for being above a certain age. You can actually hire based on demographic characteristics. Right. Even though it's not stated, that's how decisions are made. And even with all of that, and you as an outside observer, you go, well, why would someone want to subject themselves to that? Because when you're in it and when it's good, it's great. Yeah. There was a really good story. I don't know. Do you read Ken Levine's blog? No. Ken Levine was a radio guy out in Los Angeles, but then got fed up with the DJ rat race and became a writer on MASH. And then later was a writer on Cheers and was a producer and got bored with comedy writing and became a baseball broadcaster. And now is a very good blog, both like about modern media issues, but also like a lot of great Hollywood stories. But he was kind of in the Los Angeles radio orbit in the late 60s and early 70s, back in the days when KHJ was the big station in Los Angeles, as heard in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And their afternoon guy at KHJ was, and anybody on the West Coast who knows rock and roll radio knows the real Don Steele. He was kind of like the Dick Biondi of LA. Wild guy, screaming intros to songs, and was an extremely popular person in his day. And he left KHJ and then went to this FM station that was trying to do the same thing on FM. And of course, it's 1970 something, and right. FM radio is not in very many cars, and it wasn't very successful. And the station was a backwater. The equipment was secondhand, and it was light years away from the extremely popular KHJ. And Ken Levine was there as a young DJ, and he asks the real Don, it's like, what do you like about this? You know, everyone knew like the situation was terrible. And he said, because when it's good, it's great.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's kind of the feeling for everybody. Like, why do you put up with all of this stuff? Because when it's good, it's really, really good.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like it.
Yeah, because I remember I interviewed a long time ago Jim Moran, who's, you know, is a big supporter of this podcast, and he said the same thing. It's like crack or something. It's just, it's so exciting, and I think it's because it's creative, but it's also business, so you've got that boundary. And also the people, I think I've just met a lot of talented people because they're able to quickly do things, and they're able to meet deadlines, and they're able to do intense work. And sometimes the deadlines are like 3 minutes. I mean, sometimes you have to put something together really fast, or you have to think on your feet like that.
I've talked to people who have since left the business for all the, when we say when it's good, it's great. And when it's not great, it's not great. And maybe, you know, for a lot of people, they don't want to deal with that anymore and they leave. And, you know, asking me what's it like in a, you know, corporate communication setting or a non-broadcasting context, and like, it moves so slowly.
Right.
It's, you know, because at BBM, you know, the machine is always turning.
Yeah.
You're on 24 hours a day, and you have to fill this content hole, you know, constantly. So the pressure is always on to keep the machinery going. And, you know, outside of that, there are many, you know, meetings and boards of review and stakeholders to be pleased, and a lot of different hoops to jump through before a product goes before the public, as opposed to what we do now, where you got to get it on, and because it has to be on. And what makes it good, and the quality control process is that you have like 3 or 4 professionals, from the writer to the editor to you, the anchor, to make sure it gets on the air as in a very professional manner, and in a manner that the audience expects.
But also, I think also being in the media, and this is also true of Hollywood from the people I've been talking to, it's so extremely competitive that there's so much at stake, and you're like, am I going to be next? Am I going to be booted? And it's that kind of, you know, you're sort of living on the edge, but it's sort of thrilling. Because I remember I was talking to Steve, oh my gosh, why am I spacing? You know, the guy who does the pet show, and
Steve Dale.
Yeah, Steve Dale. Why am I spacing? Okay, and he was saying that, you know, he would always go in and he's like, okay, my card still works. I'm like, I know what you're talking about, because I'll swipe him like, okay, it's still green and I can go in, or still red or whatever. So.
Oh yeah, there was remember remember the day when the day ownership changed.
Oh yeah.
And all of our email, like, there was just a lot of just housekeeping on day one, as I recall. It was, how do you navigate the new intranet? How do you navigate the new like internal website for all the HR and back office functions? And then we all got new email addresses and new prompts and new passwords, and mine didn't work. And I absolutely clenched. I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going off in the ice flow. And I went back into Ron Gleason's office and I said, my email's not working. And he's like, what's the problem? He's like, because you have to type, there's already an R Hart in the company. You're R Hart 1.
Oh my God.
Like, oh, well, that's a relief.
That's funny.
But it's just like, that's the first place your mind goes. It's not like,
Right,
oh,
exactly.
there's a technical snafu. It's like, I've been banished.
Well, yeah, because I've already been laid off. Okay. I mean, it was CBS Radio. I already was laid off. So now I'm like, okay, I've already gone through that. And that was part-time. It wasn't even full-time. So I'm thinking, okay, I've experienced it. Now full-time is more extreme. It feels more extreme. But I was gonna say, oh yeah, so about the, you know, wondering if you're still working there. I think that's also what makes some people really perform, because they know that this might be their last day or something. Now, some people are lazy and they phone it in, which I think is strange if you're working in the media.
I mean, I obviously, people are motivated by whatever motivates them. I don't think that's a very good way to go through life, just from a long-term
Right.
mental health standpoint.
Yeah.
Because if you go through every day like thinking, okay, today's the day the bad things happening,
Right.
um, the lows are still very low and the highs are not existent. Like
Right.
you're like, it's impossible to take joy in things if you always think, the safe is hanging over your head.
Right.
And then, let's say it does happen. At that
Yeah.
point, you're looking back and when you had your old job, and it's like, well, I lived every day in abject terror.
Right. Right.
And I think there's something good in that, is that it can give you an edge and give you a degree of focus that is necessary and could take you to the next level. But at the same time, it can also like drive you to distraction and be very counterproductive.
Well, yeah,
So I
that's the
think,
extreme. Yeah. I mean, people do live in that extreme where they're like super paranoid or they're super competitive or they try to cut people's knees. And it's like, okay, just calm down. Okay. Because if you're acting like this, if I do go somewhere else, I'm definitely gonna keep you in mind for somebody not to hire or not to work with or whatever.
well, I think you're no doubt familiar with the website of the guy who um, claims to have all the inside radio information. And it's like, I know, like, and there are massive layoffs coming to literally every
Oh,
broadcasting company in America. Nobody is safe.
is that the one that you have to pay for?
Yes, you
Oh,
have to
okay.
pay for this inside information. It's like, okay, but at that point, by the time these super secret plans get to him, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
Like, you can't call up broadcasting executive A and say, hey, I saw this hot tip from this guy. What can I do to, like, that's no, I mean, you can act on it by being proactive and find another place to go. That might be a way of, but that also may not be the smartest thing either, because we've done many stories in the business hour about how, quitting doesn't solve all of your problems. And a lot of people might have jumped during the Great Resignation and discovered that the next gig wasn't all that good.
Wait, is that actually, because I did see some stat like X%, but is that really true, or are they just making a story out of it? The Great Resignation situation.
I mean, obviously, the Great Resignation is real. Like, there
Yeah.
is a stat that the Labor Department tracks, like the quit rate is still like higher than it's ever been.
Mm.
And you can tell that the job, and that's like a metric for the health of the job market, that if the quit rate is high, then people feel confident that if they do quit, they can find a new job.
Mm.
But in terms of like radio rumor mongering, it's like, you know what? Either your number's up and there's nothing you can do about it, or just keep doing your job and being a professional and
Right.
doing your best work. Like, just sitting around being anxious or sitting around just being mad, it
Mhm.
won't help you in the long run.
Well, I mean, I think it's good to be aware of the business conditions, but you really have to bring your A game all the time. And also, it keeps you disciplined in case you are laid off. And then you can say, okay, but I did bring my A game and I have all this excellent portfolio. But I was gonna say also, one thing I do, what I do ever since I got hired full time is I keep track of every positive comment I get from people, because I don't think, because I deal with people in bits, bits and bobs. So I keep a list and I'm going to turn it in at my 1 year anniversary and just say, okay, this is all that's happened. This is all the things I've achieved in the past year, just as an FYI.
That's actually, that's a smart thing to do. I remember there was a producer at GN who kind of kept a running list of the accomplishments of the show that he was on, whether it was ratings or a guest saying something positive or getting a particular newsmaker before everybody else. Like, you should kind of keep a running list of your accomplishments, because to do it mentally, and if you're kind of trying to remember it when the time comes to remember it, you may not have a complete list. So it never hurts to write something down.
Yeah. And also, I mean, what I do is I write down the person, the date, and then the comment, or so either they said it to me or they sent an email, and then I keep the emails. But another thing I learned over the years, and this is good advice for people, is you know, you, especially as you gain experience in the work world, it's good to keep track, because some people assume that because you're a certain age or something, you don't have much knowledge. But actually, if you keep track of everything you've accomplished, you actually do have a lot of skills and knowledge, and you can't let other people be negative about that. So
It's also weird, it wasn't too long ago when, I started when I was 20. And for the longest time, I was someone in my 20s. I always thought I was kind of on the younger end of the spectrum of employees. And of course, and it's very easy to feel like you're a kid when you're working with, Wayne Larrivee or Orion Samuelson or Lyle Dean or Pat Cassidy, like people who had been around for a very long time. And I don't know when this happened, but I started talking about things that to me seem very recent, like the 2000 election or 9/11 are events that to me happened yesterday. I can tell you like where I was going, what I was doing. I could tell you the pizza order from the night of the 2000 election. And to a lot of our coworkers now, this is history. This is something that happened when they were in second grade.
right.
And it's kind of bizarre to go from being, oh, I'm the kid, to, well, now I'm the grizzled old veteran, the
Right.
font of all advice and knowledge, and the person who remembers traditions from long ago. It's kind of it's a strange transition, but I kind of like it. It's kind of fun.
Well, yeah, that's good, because I think also some people who are not very experienced at all, and they may be younger, they assume that anything before they were born is not worthy of even acknowledging. And or they think that people who are above a certain, this is why I'm going to post something on LinkedIn again about this, but or they think that people of a certain age can't learn anything new, and they don't understand, like, people have been learning new things for several years and they're still able to learn new things.
I mean, I really hope that, if you are, someone who is recently out of college and that is something you believe, you should disabuse yourself of that notion very quickly, because you will be surprised at what people know and at what age they know it.
But not just out of college. There are people even who maybe they've been out of college for a few years and they still have that attitude. I'm like, are you still living with your parents? Because your attitude is very juvenile. Like, I don't say that to them, but I'm thinking to them. It's like, if you're making your own way in the world, you probably would get rid of such an attitude, because you have to get along with people to get things done.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, you're going to be dealing with, you're going to, I'm going to say dealing with, but you're going to be in collaborative group situations throughout your professional life. And I know we live in this glorious new era of people working from home, but you have to know how to work with other people, and you have to have kind of an attitude that allows you to work with other people. Like, it even, in our little corner of the working world, technology is constantly changing. And I'm not just talking about like the digital component or podcasts. It's just the tools we need to do our job are constantly changing. When I started, I came in at the very end of the tape era. We still had carts at WTMJ, and we still had tape. And granted, we had moved beyond cutting up tape with razor blades. Like, that was part of the distant past before me. I remember saying, like, just out of the blue, man, I could never possibly just physically cut tape with a razor blade and tape it back together. And Gene Miller, who at the time was the morning newsman on the FM station, was like, turned to the morning host on the AM and said, "Can you slap him, please?" Like, it was very joking, but for the generation of radio broadcasters who are older than me, like, that was their everyday life. But I remember, like, the pride of getting a really tight cart edit. That was a cool feeling. Or queuing up the tape, with seconds to spare, and like starting something right on time and just, nailing that cue. there's a great deal of professional satisfaction that came from that. And then by 2002, it was over. We had gone from carts to digital production.
No, I think you're right, because whether you're on the air or behind the scenes, there are a lot of technical things you have to learn. So for instance, I don't want to be boring, but like, just for instance, let's say I can't put a file into the system to be aired. And then I've got to think about a workaround instead of bothering IT. I'm like, what can I do to fix this? Oh, I'll do XYZ. Here's my MacGyver way of doing it. And it's very
everybody has
nerdy.
one. Everybody has one. There were you know, now everyone talks about the less than success story that was FM News 101.1, may it rest in peace. But at one point during its evolution, they wanted to not automate it so much, but like make it, instead of an anchor reading stories, they would just link all the recorded stories together. And I think the goal was eventually to scale it up so that you would have like small reporting staffs in every city in which they owned a station, and then they would send it to Chicago or New York and piece the whole thing together. And in a lot of ways it didn't work because you had to time it out really well and make sure that because there were time checks in there, and you had to make sure like the math added up, so you would hit all of your time checks, and it worked maybe 40% of the time. But as a result of like trying and struggling to make this work, we ended up doing something with the automation technology that the people who wrote the software never intended.
That's cool.
And they were actually like, wow, you were capable of doing this. Like that it wasn't supposed to do that. So those MacGyver workarounds, every single person in broadcasting has one.
And it's very nerdy and exciting. Now I have a question. This is from Jeff Burnett, loyal supporter of my podcasting endeavors. He says, hi, Rob. What's the one thing that comes to mind when being on air during those big events? Feeling of the station newsroom. How do they feel? How the team was operating, how the information was coming in. Jeff works in TV. So,
I mean, it depends on the situation. Like, I'll give you a perfect example, which was, I was on the air when the Aurora shooting happened at the Henry Pratt Company. And, there's the feeling of, the information is coming in. What do we know? What can we get right now? Keep in mind that we're 45 miles away physically from the scene. We have to get a human being out there. How quickly can they get there? How fast can they get through like police cordons to actually see what's going on? So there's the logistical stance of like just getting people out there. And then there's, how much information can we get right now by the phone? Can you call neighbors? Even if you just had somebody who lived next to the plant who could see what was going on and talk to you, that would be very necessary. And then it's like, how do we get access to news conferences as they come in? Mm-hmm. Obviously, Aurora Police, they're gonna have a briefing. How do we get that briefing so we can bring it in live? There's just so many operational questions you have to answer. And then there's just like the who, what, when, where, why. And because things are happening now on social media, there's a lot of chasing down of rumors too that you might see. I mean, you don't want to dismiss things that you see on Twitter because there might actually be a germ of something in there, but there's just a lot of kind of smoke you have to cut through. And then once all of that goes away, you can grapple with the enormity of the human tragedy in an event like that. Fortunately, I don't want to say fortunately, but I was not working in news when Sandy Hook happened.
Oh gosh.
And
horrible.
But Chris Kreidel was on the air that afternoon at BBM, and she said, next to 9/11, that was the saddest day of her career.
Very sad. Yeah. And then I was going to say about let's go back to unless Jeff asked another question, but back to the nerdy aspect. I think what makes the rest of a lot of other jobs slowly, because remember, I didn't start in radio, so it is sort of slow, is that in radio, like we don't have like a million people working at our station. Ooh, okay. Somebody else is asking a question. I'll hold that question. Okay, Scott Becker, he works in publicity.
Oh, I've known
Yeah, he's
Scott for a
cool.
long time.
Hi, Scott. Okay, he asks, where do you see all news radio stations like WBBM 5 years from now?
I think we're going to be in good shape. I think the way we get, it's probably going to be more, 10 years ago when the station was just started the FM simulcast, the mixture was a lot of AM, a little bit of FM. I think 5 years from now, it's going to be a little bit of AM, a lot of FM, and a surprising or a pretty decent number on the app. Because I think a lot of people are going to go, and we already know this, a lot of people get the station through the smart speaker or through the phone. And there's always, the cynics always say like, well, my kids go to college and they don't have a radio. It's like, well, they do have access to something that gives them radio programming.
Right.
It's just not an AM FM radio. And I think we do decent streaming numbers. I know the other competitors in our format do decent streaming numbers, and that's probably where it's going to go. And in a world of a zillion options, something like a WBBM that's really well known, it has the credibility and has the market knows it and knows what it can deliver. As long as we still are doing what we're doing and delivering what the audience expects of it, they're going to find it somewhere, whether it's FM or on the stream. But I think it's going to be a lot more streaming based 5 years from now.
And then Jeff Burnett has a question, but I don't know if you can actually answer it. The question is, what was Randy Michaels really like to work for at FM News 101? I've read so many books about him and heard so many crazy stories. Can you discuss that?
This is going to disappoint a lot of people. It's a story I don't tell very often, but January of 2012, I received an invitation from Andy Friedman, who was running the newsroom in Chicago, and he said, what are you doing Saturday? And of course, at the time, I had just gotten married. There were no kids in the picture, so I had nothing but time in the world. We're going to fly down to Cincinnati in Lee Abrams' plane.
Whoa,
and because Randy wants to take us all out for chili. And I had known, very much, hard driving, rock and roll, wild man that Randy was. And honestly, it could not have been a more pleasant afternoon. We went to a couple of chili places. He knew like the entire history of Cincinnati and, why it became a big chili capital, why it was known as Porkopolis, where the kind of like notorious stories of, river life, either on Cincinnati or on the Kentucky side, had a lot of great radio war stories from working either in Buffalo or at the old WKRC AM 55, then over to WLW and Q102. Like it was just delightful. And then took us out for ice cream at the end of the night and took us to the airport, and we flew back to Midway.
Wow.
And it was a really fun, like he just had a lot of great stories about just radio programming, and he knew every station and every set of call letters in the country. He had a big antenna set up at his house outside of Cincinnati, so he could get, at the time, the J-Core stations in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Columbus. And he said it was very annoying to all the other people who worked at those stations that he could bring him in at his house and kind of comment on things as they were happening. But I enjoyed working with him. It was a fun experience. It was a fun experience. It was a challenging experience. It was an educational experience. It really made you appreciate what made a successful news talk station work. Like, because I was at TMJ or a WGN, and all the heavy lifting had been done decades ago. It was already a successful franchise. It was already a big vehicle in motion. And then, we had to build the ship from the very beginning. And I think it made me appreciate that much more when it works, because when it works, you've built something that's built to last. But there's a lot of hard work and a lot of pitfalls you can have on the way there.
Yeah, Jeff Burnett said Randy Michaels puts the cowboy in Clear Channel, or put the cowboy in Clear Channel.
Yeah, they were swashbucklers back then. It was just like it was like a different era in broadcasting. I mean, and for better or for worse. But they were, they had swagger back then. That's for darn sure. And people liked it and people disliked it in equal measure.
Yeah, and Jeff added, that's cool to hear how he turned into all the stations before the days of streaming.
Well, there was, I mean, there were also,
means how he tuned into all the stations. Yeah.
There were legendary stories. Bill Drake, who was a top 40 programmer who worked for RKO, also responsible for the aforementioned KHJ. I guess, had a big house in Hollywood because he had programmed all these successful top 40 stations, but he could rig up, he had a phone line where he could dial into any station and listen. And I guess any Drake jock kind of lived in fear of the phone ringing because Bill Drake was listening by his pool and heard something he didn't like.
Yeah, I was gonna say my only Randy Michaels story is when he was running the Tribune, and I was working at the WGN radio on a Sunday, and he came in with some people, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's him. But anyway, I was doing my work, and then he said, what are you working on? I said, well, I'm just getting some smaller stories, more from Central Illinois, just to find something that's more human interest. And he's like, that's interesting, or something like that. He didn't diss me for it. And then I saw him and then I asked him some question like, how do I get to work in the tower? Because at that time, I don't know if you remember this, but they opened up all of the Tribune. Like you didn't have to, it wasn't segmented anymore. Like you can use your key card to go anywhere you want, even that special private area that used to be.
I had engagement. I took my engagement photos up on that. That was fun when they opened the deck up. Because people would go up there for barbecues at the end of the day. I remember Kathy and my wife and I would go downtown and like have dinner at what was that? Oh God, the Purple Pig, the Blind Pig, whatever the place was across the street. And then it's a Saturday, we'd go up there and watch the Navy Pier fireworks, and there a bunch of Tribune people were up there. So that was it. I enjoyed that particular perk. And then when that era ended, I noticed that the doors were locked once again.
Yeah, because when what happened was I was just a freelancer, and I thought I was hanging out with somebody I was working with, and we're like, let's just try to see what we can get into. And we are password to everywhere, even those exclusive offices that were old, like nobody was using them. They were like some old 1920 something from back in the day. And I thought, wow, this building's really neat. And I just felt like we can go anywhere. But yes, of course, there were negative things about it. But if you were just really a nerd, you could just really check things out. And he obviously was very passionate about radio. But I think I only talked to the guy twice. That's it.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I know everybody's got opinions, but in my personal dealings with him, they were all fine.
That's good. Now, another thing is about radio, like, well, first of all, how do you the topic really that I want to know, the overall topic for today is, how do you know so much? Because I look at your Twitter. Have you been reading tons of stuff since you were like 3 or something?
Yes, it's just it's always, it's like, as a young boy, I always was interested in trains and the space program, and any book about those two subjects, I would find it. The Titanic was the other one. And any book about those three subjects, if I can get my hands on it, either at the bookstore or a library, I would grab it and read it. And then, of course, now, with the proliferation of online sources, there's just so much more you can devour. And a lot of it's just like there's no other place for it to go except for Twitter. It's just kind of, let me throw this.
Yeah, but you're also like, you're not like 70 or 80 or 90, and you're talking about old school media and old school culture.
Well, because I was interested in that. I mean, there was in some ways, I've always been kind of interested in just media and culture. It's just always been that way. I want to say, The Simpsons to a certain extent, and Mystery Science Theater 3000, uh, because there were so many old references to entertainment and pop culture from the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, that I basically had to look it up to see what was so funny. And then you'd learn the history behind these various references, and all of a sudden, oh, that is indeed very clever, and it's an interesting story too. But the one thing the one good thing, the great thing I would say about social media is that it allows you to find these communities of interest that you might have by yourself just kind of been, well, I'm the only person who finds this interesting, and then you throw it out into the ether, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or elsewhere, and then you discover there are like a lot of other people who are as interested in this as you are and may have a different interpretation on it. So that's kind of, I find that to be very gratifying.
That's true. But I mean, when you post all that stuff on Twitter, do people respond? Do people send you messages? Do they say, how the heck do you know this stuff? I mean,
I think it's just a lot of recognition. It's like, hey, I know this too, but did you know that? And here's another resource or another book, or here's something I saw that I thought was really neat. I mean, there are some times in which it comes in really handy. I mean, last Sunday, my wife and I were in New York for a wedding, and just like a lot of other people, we got a text several hours before our flight back to Chicago saying our flight was canceled. And because I was this train nerd, I knew everything about the Northeast Corridor, and that if we couldn't get a flight out of New York on Southwest, the potential existed to take a train to either Boston or Philadelphia or Baltimore or Washington, to try to get home to Midway Airport that night. And luckily, we were able to get to a late flight out of Reagan National in DC, but we had to go to Penn Station and take the train. But because I knew that just from being a weirdo who read train schedules as a kid, I just knew, bing, bang, boom, this is how we go, and this is what we got to do, and that's how we have to get to Washington, and problem solved.
I love trains. I mean, we're going to go to LA and we're going to take a train again, but we might take it both ways. I'm not sure yet, but I've also taken out east and everything. But, one thing about the train is, I don't know if I told you this off the air, but I really see how much land, this sounds really, it sounds like I'm being like a wannabe or something, but it's really sad how much land used to belong to Native Americans and now it doesn't. I mean, you see the reservations from the train, but you see like the buffalo should be roaming here. There should be all these kinds of people here. What happened? It's really sad. And thanks to the train trips, I actually went down this rabbit hole and I just started studying about who were the Native Americans in all these areas. And actually I found out that I'm not even living on former Native American land. I'm living on a landfill. So now I'm thinking, I really don't want to move from here, because it's just the whole thing. It just, when you take a train or when you drive across the country, you just really see how this country's been affected by history.
There was a very interesting podcast I listened to a couple of years ago. I mean, to go back to the discussion of how much I hated driving home from downtown on Saturday afternoon because traffic was worse on the weekend than it was during the week. So I'd find these history podcasts, and there was a really good one about the Cahokia that lived in Southern Illinois. And at one point, like maybe in the 1200s, that was a civilization that rivaled civilizations in Europe and in Africa, in parts of the world that had been explored and documented. And that had there not been a flu outbreak or some sort of respiratory disease that kind of decimated the population, the people who, European settlers, colonists who came here, they would have encountered like a robust Cahokia civilization, and that might have been a very different story about the history and evolution of the North American continent.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's a good point. Now, so what other are you into? Another thing I started doing now that I have more downtime because I don't have 5 jobs anymore. I used to have like no time. Is I started reading these old encyclopedias from the early 60s that my husband has. And do you ever read just a bunch of stuff like that? just read a bunch of information like that.
We used to have like we had World Books growing up, and I think my parents still would get like World Book would come out with um an update every year on new things that happened that would be in it, like it would be an addendum to the encyclopedia set you received in 1989. And that was I'd like, they still have it. I'd like to go back and take a look at, where do things end? Like, I'm pretty sure the USSR is still alive and well
Okay.
in that particular set of encyclopedias. Honestly, you ask where that comes from. I would say it's a trait that I got from my grandfather, because he was always somebody who, if he wanted to find something or I had a question for him, he would always either turn to his set of encyclopedias or his big pile of Reader's Digest almanacs. And it was like, this is where all the information is. It's in the encyclopedia, it's in the almanac. If you want to find out when William Shatner's birthday is, there is the section of the almanac with the with the celebrity birthdays, and you can find out, yes, he was in fact born in March of 1931. And before Wikipedia, before Google, that was how you got your information.
Yeah.
And if you had to work in broadcasting, that was how you had to check your facts.
Yeah, and what's that other thing? I forgot now. The thing where it's like a calendar of events, and I think Pat Cassidy had one, and I know Elliot Abrams had one.
Oh, like he had that quick reference book that Pat had about, today was National, have your cake and eat it too day, which
right. I forgot. Gosh, I forgot.
Anyways, if it was, I would try to continue that. It's always, and if he would tell you this too, it's always kind of you have to find the appropriate places to put that in there, because it's National Give Your Boss a Hug Day, so go and give your boss a hug. Our top local story, death. You don't want,
right.
You got to find, you don't want to go and, it's like the Casey Kasem thing. You don't want to do like a funny or humorous factoid, leading into a doggy death dedication. You have to, it has to flow seamlessly. Sometimes do it during the weather.
Okay, so basically, but in radio, what is your favorite era? And are you into old time radio and stuff like that?
Honestly, you know what, I this came from when I started, and I remember like back a long time ago, when I was 8 or 9 years old, again, because I was a big honking weirdo.
Do people think you're a weirdo, or you just lived your life?
No, I don't think there were very many 8-year-olds doing this, but you may remember on WBBM, at night, they had either the Blackhawks were on, or Dave Baum had a talk show. And then after that, Chuck Shaden had his Those Were the Days, which was,
I only remember that from WNIB, but okay, I didn't know it was on BBM.
Yeah, and it was, so you'd listen to like the Jack Benny Show or Dragnet or The Shadow, and you're 8, and these old radio shows had their intended effect. Like you could, your imagination is working as you're listening to this. And then flash forward 30 years, and I'm filling in for Bob Conway. And if you're on, at the time, if you're on Conway's shift, he was 9 to 5 p.m. to a.m. So if you're on that clock, you're on the air from 10 to midnight. Every other day you're running When Radio Was. You're off for 2 hours, then you're on from 3 to 5. And so I would run the When Radio Was, and I got to tell you, like, I was into it.
Yeah.
They were good shows.
It's still running. Yeah. It runs at midnight. Yeah.
And they're good shows. And it's amazing. These things are produced 70 years ago or 80 years ago, and the audio quality is good. And so that's something I really like. I know there have been many attempts to kind of revive that. If you might remember the CBS Radio Mystery Theater with E.G. Marshall, WGN, you may recall, had the Twilight Zone with Stacy Keach, which was always great because they would try to put like a radio staffer, like a staff member, into the show, like as a background voice. And I was on one of them, like they would just drop you in, like the show would be produced for the rest of the country. And then they would try to drop in one of the staffers in some dead spot as like a background character. And my one shot of old time radio glory was, I said, I think he's dead, and tried to make it sound as convincing as possible. Right. But that is an era of radio that I think it could be, I mean, I think there have been many attempts to try to bring that back. You may recall not too long ago, Odyssey, hand over your heart, had they called it a podcast movie, which was basically an old time radio show, but they got a bunch of contemporary actors to perform in it. So it's an art form that, it's when it works really well.
But there are a lot of podcasts. There are a lot of drama podcasts now, a lot of scripted podcasts, or not just podcasts, but Audible puts out a lot of scripted stuff. So not just like podcasts, they're just like audio shows or something. So they're essentially recreating that, but just with different technology.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's always it's yours truly, Johnny Dollar, just in different sizes and different shapes and with different people.
Okay, wait. Jeff asked another question. He said you can hold this off, but anyway, he said he's curious to know your thoughts about Chicago media personalities. Why is it that well-known talent will bounce from station to station every so often, but it never seems that stations take a chance on fresh talent or allow fresh talent to move up? They always hire the same people, and you never really hear of new people breaking through.
Where do I fit on that spectrum now?
I think I know what he's talking about.
I have been.
Not you. I think it's the people. I know what he's talking about. He's probably referring to those older people.
I've been in the market now for 17 years, and again, the whole notion of it seems like doesn't seem that long ago that I started, but 17 years is in fact a long time,
right?
And so. I don't know. I don't know how other stations operate, but I do know that there are, if you're a more established name and you have a great deal of rating success, you can bring a lot of advertising business with you, and that carries a lot of weight.
Right. And then Scott Becker has a question: of all the people that you have met while working in the media, who stands out as the most memorable?
So at GN.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. Jeff Burnett said, definitely not Rob, when he was saying, you're talking about the people being recycled. He said, definitely not you.
It's kind of funny. Like, you're like, you feel like you're part of the background. You've been around for quite some time, which is great. Right. That's always, I grew up here, and wanting to work here and sticking around is a great source of satisfaction.
Yeah.
I'd say the three people that always jump out at me are, I got to talk to Jimmy Carter, which is, how there aren't very many former presidents you can talk to. And Jimmy Carter was a really cool interview, and he was a very nice man. At GN, we had Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon was a frequent loop guest and a very nice guy.
Wow. And
because he's from Oak Lawn, had a lot of stories about the White Sox,
right,
and seeing them in the 60s. When I was
saw Behind the Music with him. Do you ever see that Behind the Music with REO Speedwagon?
It's a fun band, and he's like a really cool guy.
Yeah.
And then at GN, we had two guests that I literally ran down the hallway.
Wow.
To go to the Showcase studio to meet them. The first one was Billy Pierce, the legendary White Sox pitcher, who was a guest of Bob Surratt, and could not have been nicer. Like, just a really classy, like, you want to talk about the White Sox with him, he would talk to you. Like, he was just a very nice guy. and it was the day after the home opener in 2008, and he was breaking down Javier Vasquez's pitching performance from the day before, which was really cool. And the other one was Dave Barry, which it may not be
the columnist, the writer.
Yes, he was promoting a children's book at the time, and he kind of left being a daily humor columnist and started writing these Carl Hiaasen style mysteries that were more or less about like the crazy characters you find in South Florida. And there was a book about a caper on a casino boat called Tricky Business that I really liked, and I had to like run him down in the hallway and tell him that. Yeah. And he was very pleased.
That's cool. Yeah, he's one of those quote unquote lucky. I don't mean lucky, he got it through luck, but he's one of those rare people who actually end up living the dream because he got to write about his life and his observations, and he was a big success. And it's hard to get that, especially nowadays. You know, people don't care about columnists as much.
Well, as a high school, as a very dorky high school student, two of his books I love. There was the Dave Barry Guide to Guys, which will live forever because it had this chart about how men position themselves at urinals in a bathroom, and that you never, ever, ever go number one next to somebody. There's always a buffer urinal. And if you have to like pee next to somebody else, the chart had you go in the sink. So that was a very funny book. And then the other one, and this came in really handy in my AP American history class, was Dave Barry Slept Here, which was his book about the history of the US. And chances are, if you read that book and you're listening, you are already talking about the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was a long kind of a running gag throughout the entire book.
Okay, so what are you reading right now? Or are you reading it? Do you think, actually, my question is, do you think that people still read books as much?
Yes. There are always book clubs going on. There are, my mother-in-law like reads 3 or 4 books a month. Like that's her big passion project in retirement, is reading a lot. And I'm currently working my way through the John Owens book, the Chili Dog MVP, about Dick Allen and the 1972 White Sox, which is less about the team and more about like a city and a society in transition. And it's an absolutely fascinating read if you're either a fan of the White Sox, obviously, or just of local history or American history. It's a very
what do they discuss? Like, what do you mean in transition? How's that?
Well, I mean, this is 1972, and you have kind of the city of Chicago as it had existed up until maybe 1965. A very segregated city, a city of neighborhoods where everyone had to keep to their own kind, and all of a sudden, you had a lot of African Americans who were either moving into the city from the South or had served in the military and were coming back and felt that because we had served our country with honor and distinction, the kind of the social structure as it had existed for a century up to that point is no longer acceptable. And the structure of the local Democratic Party, as it had existed for a century up to that point, there were younger voices and people who didn't, felt that this kind of very set way of doing things and moving up in the organization was no longer acceptable. So while you have, Dick Allen coming to the White Sox, and Dick Allen was the reputation he had was mercurial, but just he was a guy who knew what he wanted and stood up for himself, and that level of self-assuredness and kind of new generational thinking was seeping in everywhere. And the city and everyone who lived there kind of had to deal with things changing profoundly for the first time in a very long time. So
he does get into all that?
Yes, it's really good. It's an excellent book.
Okay, now why are you such a huge White Sox fan even now when they're not doing well? Like,
I
how do you deal with them when they're not doing well?
um I just kind of tune it out. I mean, you don't get extra points for living and dying with them.
Right.
You can do other things.
Right.
Yeah, a South Sider, came into it through family, and when things get wrong, when things go bad and people get upset, I'm like, you picked this stupid team, you're sticking with it. Like that's
Right. Right.
again, it's like, when it's good, it's great. And I was at the playoff game they won last year, at guaranteed rate, and man, if that type of atmosphere and that just like feeling in the ballpark,
Yeah.
it's like you want that again and again and again and
Yeah.
again and again. It was such a fun evening.
Yeah. Especially when it's a hard fight and then they overcome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so okay, so if you're from the I forgot, are you from the city or
Yeah, I grew up in Beverly.
okay, so what's it like to live in the northern suburbs as a South Sider?
The
And actually, you
joke.
really are a South Sider because see, people will say they're from the South Side, but then they'll say, "Oh yeah, I was born and we moved out when I was 3." I'm like, then you're not from the South Side, you're from the suburbs. So,
There are a lot of White Sox fans up here,
wow,
in
okay.
this particular corner of Northwest suburbia, and I always joke that there's a bunch of White Sox fans up here, and we all think we're the only one.
But do you see that there's a difference between the culture of the northern area and the southern area?
I don't know if it's like a really distinct question, or a distinct difference. I mean, I because we're not that far outside of the city, so it's not uh, all that removed from like the city of Chicago's energy and culture.
Right.
So, but I can kind of, it's my thing. It has its own unique history and culture, and I think maybe there are some people who live up here who don't know it exists, or
Right.
don't know of it, outside of like, this is something that happens on St. Patrick's Day,
Hmm.
and are very pleased when you show it to them. And I think that's kind of my attitude, is like, well, you've never heard of it before, come on down and check it out. It's actually pretty cool.
Okay, now a question from Jeff Burnett. Here's a question about the noon business hour. How do you stay current with business trends when talking with executives and financial analysts? Are there go-to sources that you have for business news? Any advice for someone who wants to get more into reporting, producing business news? Oh, wait, Jeff, I forgot. You work in TV. What do you do? I forgot. Because didn't you just go to a news station? Hopefully he'll respond. But can you answer that question?
Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC. There are a couple of business podcasts and podcasters I listen to. And, because what I've learned from doing the show full time is that, you kind of have to teach yourself too, about before you can, go on and be a host. And I've learned a lot more about financial markets, commodities markets, oil, in the last 8 months than, and I've been on the show since 2016, but you're always like teaching yourself. And, those are the places I go to have kind of a well-rounded education on what's happening on that particular day.
Okay. And then he said he worked at WTHR in Indianapolis. Oh, you're not there. Oh, he produces a 6 p.m. show. Okay. And also he says,
The
asked,
alma mater of David Letterman, by the way.
yeah, I'm sure he knows that because Jeff knows a lot about media. And then he's asked how did you get picked for the noon business hour? Was there something that made you stand out, that made you the best fit? Ooh, that's a good question.
I think there's nothing more, nothing to it more than, I was the primary fill-in. Cisco was doing it full time, and when he was off, I would fill in for him. And so when it was time to move everybody up, it was, Cisco went to mornings, I slotted into Cisco's old deal in middays, and it was a very kind of easy transition.
Oh, really? Okay. Because I'm just wondering, they must have liked how you sounded, because I don't know if they'd put anybody in there. So
I mean, I it was kind of interesting. They said very early on, do you want to do the business hour? And, you'll work with Cisco, you'll work with Chris, you'll work with Regine Schlesinger, you'll work with Nick Young. So you have a lot of people who would help you through it. and then, they're all very supportive and answered any questions I had. So I have to credit those people with really helping me out early on. But yeah, it had been, they kind of asked me to do it one day, and I managed to stick around.
And then also, I think that Andy, your producer, does great prep.
Oh, Andy's great. I mean, Andy's terrific. Andy Gersher is a producer of the Business Hour, by far the best person I've ever worked with.
Wow. Okay, why is that? Because you've worked with a lot of people.
I think just he's prepared. He has a good Rolodex. He also knows what works, and what the audience would be interested in. Like he is really good, and that show is good in many ways because Andy's very good.
Right. Yeah, he really lines up. And then he said, Jeff Burnett said, "That's right." I don't know what you're saying. That's right too, but I don't know. It's hard in real time, but.
Like his Channel 13 was David Letterman's.
Oh, right. David Leonard. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And okay. So, and then let's see. I don't see any more questions from these people, but so when you said you're into old time radio, but what about just like regular, just radio in general? What is your favorite period and genre?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I've listened to a lot of audio from a lot of people over the years, and you begin to appreciate it on its own merits. Not all 60s and 70s top 40 radio is good. And I found myself actually kind of gravitating towards like middle of the road AM radio station presentations from long ago, including some styles of broadcasting that just don't exist anymore. Like if you look at the old WNEW-AM in New York, which was
Cousin Brucey.
No, what Brucey wasn't there, but it was kind of like a standards middle of the road station. If you're watching Mad Men, chances are Don Draper was listening. Had his car tuned to 1130 when he was going to and from the city. And it was just a different presentation, different style of radio comedy and personality, just outside of the very segmented, top 40 kind of music presentation that everybody appreciates and enjoys. So I don't say that I have a particular favorite, because I think is this, good is good, and good can come from any different era, whether it's the 1950s or whether it's from today, quite frankly. Like it's, art well done, to me is just, it sells itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Wow, that's a good quote. Art well done I should type that out. Art well done should sell itself. Yeah.
You should tell Art Nasseri that.
Right. Did you just make that up? Art well done should sell itself. Yeah. I'm typing it out. Okay. In with one hand.
Well, it's pure unadulterated BS, but I'm glad you found it profound.
Well, yeah, I'm just typing it out so I don't forget. I'll post it on Twitter too. And then Jeff Burnett says, Rob, how do you feel about Sirius XM? Do you like satellite radio? Is it still a game changer?
We have it, and I the one thing I love, and I'm glad there is a community of Twitter people who have come around on this, is every Saturday morning, people from all walks of life come together to listen to and comment on whatever American Top 40, the 70s broadcast is on that weekend. And it's great on multiple levels. One, it's, the bottom 20 of the top 40 countdown are songs from that year that you never hear.
Yeah.
They get lost to history. And then two, I think you kind of forget and appreciate over, once again, how good Casey Kasem was.
Yeah.
As both a broadcaster and a storyteller. Because the information about chart movement or the history of a particular band or how this song came about, like you're talking about something from 45 years ago, and it's still compelling as hell.
Right.
So I think that's something I really enjoy about Sirius. Some other things that I could do, I do think some of the music channels, there's a great deal of repetition.
Right.
Um, there are a lot of genres, but the playlists are a mile wide and an inch deep. But I mean, it's like any service, it has things that are good and things that are, need improvement.
Yeah, I was gonna recommend to people. You probably, I don't know if you're into this, but I really like techno, DJ, and ambient and that kind of stuff. And a really good place to find what's new and what's live is to see the DJs on Twitch. There's live streaming of DJing, and it's really cool. And then Jeff says, oh, okay. Oh, okay. So, and then Jeff said, Casey was the best, hands down, without a question, the true master. See, now I want to go listen to Casey Kasem.
Saturday morning at like 11 o'clock Central Time. I think that's when it's on.
Yeah, and also I remember when I was working at some place and I hated my job, and I found a bunch of Steve Dahl audio online. This is before he took over everything. And I was laughing so hard I was crying, and somebody said, "What's your problem?" I said, "Oh, nothing. I'm just listening to something." And it was just so funny how they were so spontaneous making comments. I wish there was like fun radio like that. I mean, some of their stuff was sort of edgy and it was sort of vulgar, but it's how they responded to what was around that was just hilarious.
I think they would tell you this was the process of getting there. It could have been, it might have taken a long time, or maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes to like zero in on the thing that was really funny. Because when they got rolling, it was fantastic. But I don't know if modern programming would allow for the process that got you there. Kind of riffing until you find the thing that really works. But I mean, geez, Stephen.
Oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't think about that because I did listen to them back in the day. Yeah.
Because I have tapes too, and it's a 4-hour show, and they'd get something, and they didn't quite have the angle on it, and then they would kind of work through it on the air, and then they would arrive at the funny, and then of course it would be just unadulterated, like just gold.
It's sort of like the Grateful Dead when you go see the Grateful Dead and they're just like jamming, and then it becomes a song. Maybe they got it from that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the process of riffing that kind of gets to that point. I don't know if you would be allowed like 20 minutes to get there, which again, do you want to be a stickler over that? Does every second have to count? Sometimes it doesn't, especially if there's a payoff.
Yeah, I think it happens more on podcasting if people want to stay with it, or on Twitch or something.
Yeah, I mean, podcasting is basically that, where you just kind of riff on something and then you arrive at the destination, and it's really funny. Like I have found myself with some podcasts in like just wheezing from because they get to the funny, and it's like amazing. When we were on a long drive to Maine back in July, I had this Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend with John Mulaney, who was 2 years behind me at St. Ignatius.
Wow.
And they got onto something that, maybe it was just because I was tired and it was a very niche comment, but he was doing this whole thing about Frank Sinatra showing up at the Harvard Lampoon. And I couldn't even begin to like quote this thing, but it was just so naturally funny. And they were riffing on this one very specific weird topic that I couldn't breathe. Like I was laughing that hard.
Yeah, that's great. Like even somebody I interviewed here, he's an actor and he does everything. And he was talking about some funny story about being on TV and on this one show. And I was laughing so hard I thought I was gonna cry. I love when things like that happen, more spontaneous. So any other topic you want to talk about, even though we've been talking for a while and we both have to go to bed and wake up early?
You know what? This has been a lot of fun. This is a conversation that has flown by, but
I know. I know, it's very fun. Okay, tell your friends, because I want to do this. I've decided I want to do it once a week. And actually I realized that I think it's really, I was watching oh my gosh, why do I always forget names when I'm like on the you know, the who had the interview show, and from like the 70s, you know, he started in the late 60s, 70s.
Tom Snyder?
No, younger. My gosh, he was on, you know, he was more intellectual. My gosh, why can't I remember his
Dick
name?
Cavett.
Dick Cavett. Okay, do you ever watch his stuff online or on TV?
Yes. My favorite one, because it was like always the panels were like this culture clash of people, and my favorite one, and this is the best. It's from 1970, and the panel is Raquel Welch, Janis Joplin, and Chet Huntley, who was about to step down as the anchor of the Huntley Brinkley Report, because he was the lead anchor for NBC. And it's Janis Joplin asking Chet all these questions about current events, and it's a delightful conversation.
Yeah, she was a frequent guest, but I guess, you know, I was watching his show and I thought that'd be really cool to have that kind of job. I thought, no, with modern technology, I can do it myself. So that's why I started this. And I started talking to people I sort of know because I was too nervous to do a live stream. But yeah, this has been fun, and we can probably do it again because it looks like people were, I don't know if Jeff is still there, but it seems like this time was a good time as well. So
well, it was. This is. I think this is my fourth interview with you.
I know. I don't know.
From WGN to FM News to INBA, where I remember I listened back to that, and we taped that in late December 2019 for and it was posted maybe in February of 2020. So
right.
There are probably lots of comments about the trajectory of the world that was eventually, you know, turned upside down and inside out. Not too long after that post went live.
I know, it's crazy because I posted it on the INBA podcast, which I do every month. And then also I post on my own podcast. Yeah. And yes, I think you are the most frequent guest because you've moved around. And so we've sort of seen your career develop in different ways. So,
well, the next time we do this, I think I'm a bit eligible for like a sub sandwich or something, maybe a free frozen yogurt.
I had to give you the punch card. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll see you tomorrow because
this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if you know anybody else who'd be willing to do this, like Steve Dahl, who I should contact.
Yeah, I'll give him a call. He's
whoever your friends.
A good friend of mine.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can also you know, maybe recommend somebody else. Oh yeah. Okay, Jeff Burnett. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff said always love the live interviews on Facebook. And by the way, everybody, it also streams to YouTube, my personal Facebook, and also Radio Girl Pod Twitter and Metrolingua Twitter. So
well, I hope, Jeff, I answered all your questions.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's a total, when I first met him through INBA. He's the one that actually recommended me to INBA, but when I first met him, we talked a lot about radio stuff. Sometimes I still text him about radio stuff. Hopefully you'll respond to me, Jeff. I know you're like big in TV right now, and maybe Jeff will be on the podcast as well. So, all right, thanks. And I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.